Wisdom comes from reflection. Reflection with Elizabeth is to promote clarity through reflection process by seeing the logic with logical thinking. What needed for humanity is clarity of perception. Where clarity is missing, people try to substitute confidence with clarity. Confidence without clarity is a disastrous thing.
Ultimately, whatever you wish to do in your life, how much clarity do you have is all there is, isn't it? If you want to do anything successfully, you must have clarity, isn't it?
Dear audience, do you know that our brains control our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors? In other words, our behaviors are controlled by our brain. Our feelings are controlled by our brains. And our thoughts are controlled by our brains. The biggest misunderstanding is most people think feelings come from the heart and behaviors are the outcomes of the emotion driven by feelings. The truth is, it is your brain that controls your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors. That also means how we think and what we think control our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. My point is, knowing all these, how we think and what we think directly influence our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. What will influence how we think and what we think? Let's walk it through a reflection process with logical thinking. And it begins with stage 1, mindfulness. Stage 1, mindfulness. This is about facts and informations. The basis of logical thinking is facts and information. The topic today is our brains control our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The question is, what will control how we think and what we think? Logically, how we think is the way we think. It involves a thinking process, whereas what we think could be on the basis of something else, not necessarily involving a thinking process. Here is a simple fact of our brain in a nutshell. The thinking brain is our cerebral cortex, and our emotional brain is our limbic system. The largest part of our brain is cerebral. The cerebrum initiates and coordinates movement and regulates temperature. Other areas of cerebrum enable speech, judgment, thinking and reasoning, problem solving, emotions, and learning. Other functions related to vision, hearing, touch, and other senses. Limbic system regulates autonomic and endocrine function in response to emotion stimuli and also is involved in reinforcing behavior. About how we think is involved a thinking process. According to Alison Green from Boston Tutorial Services, there are 3 modes of thinking: convergent, divergent, and lateral thinking. Number 1, convergent thinking is using logic. This type of thinking is also called critical, vertical, analytical, or linear thinking. Convergent thinking is the type of thinking that focuses on coming up with a single and well-established answer to a problem. Number 2, divergent thinking is using imagination. This type of thinking is also called creative or horizontal thinking. It is a thought process or method used to generate creative ideas by exploring many possible solutions. After the process of divergent thinking has been completed, ideas and information are organized and structured using convergent thinking. Number 3, lateral thinking is using both the logic and imagination. This type of thinking is commonly referred to thinking out of the box. About what we think, this is a thinking on the basis of someone else's thoughts. For example, we may think about what the people around us say. We may think about what the news or the social medias say. We may think about what the books say. We may think about what the prominent speakers say. Last but not least, we may think about what the experts say, etc. Okay, we have a lot of information. Let's move on to stage 2 and stage 3, logical thinking and action plan. Stage 2 and stage 3, logical thinking and action plan. About what we think. According to Alison Green from Boston Tutorial Services, number 1, the convergent thinking, which use logic. Number 2, the divergent thinking, which use the imagination. Number 3, lateral thinking, which use both the logic and the imagination. The question is, what do you see from these 3 modes of thinking? What are the commonalities of these 3 modes of thinking? I see that, number 1, these 3 modes of thinking involve gathering data, facts, information, etc., then analyze and evaluate them. Number 2, these 3 modes of thinking involve thought process or method using logic. Pay attention to the divergent thinking. Although initially it used imagination, but it still wrapped up with the convergent thinking. The convergent thinking used logic. That means the basis of all these 3 modes of thinking is logic. In summary, the outcomes of these 3 modes of thinking are original, objective, and clear because the basis are data, facts, information, etc. When it is logical, it will make good sense. About what we think. This could be on the basis of someone else's thoughts, not necessarily our original thinking. The logical question is, how do you pick the right thoughts? What is the basis of your choice? We must be very clear about this because the basis of our thinking will affect our thoughts. Our thoughts will affect our feelings, and our feelings will affect our behaviors. Let's explore why would people choose to think about what others say instead of going through their own thinking process. In reality, as a coach, I have seen these situations. Number 1, it's easier to just ask and follow. Number 2, they can't be objective and they can't do logical thinking. Number 3, they simply don't see the point because it is just the way they are, etc. Of course, there are many other reasons. These 3 are the most common ones. These 3 points sound simple, but it is not. We will explore the meaning behind each point in order to be clear, in order to truly know what it ultimately means. For the situation number 1, what does it mean when people think it is easier to ask and follow? It means they would rather choose to believe. The question is, what is the basis of their beliefs? The most common ones are these. A, they believe in someone they can trust. Usually are like family members, close friends, colleagues, etc. The basis is relationship or bond. The downside is when they trust the wrong people who do not have the right knowledge or competency. It will become like the blind is leading the blind. This is very common. B, they believe in position and authority. The basis is perception and fear. They simply equate position and authority to capability and competency. Very often, this is not the case because people could be in the position or in the authority for many subjective or political reasons. C, they believe in the experts. The basis is the perception and mentality. They think an expert knows it all. This is one of the most common mentalities. Because they don't know that, for example, the doctor. Not all the doctors have the medical knowledge in 360 degrees. We need to find out their expertise. The downside is we may not have the knowledge to know what they say are all correct. But the people will take everything they say as the truth because they do not have the ability to know what is right and what is wrong. They believe in their feelings or what they saw or what they heard. The basis is self-centeredness or subjectivity. The truth is, a feeling-driven person is subjective because feeling is subjective. In summary, for those who think it is easier to ask and follow, it means the outcomes of their thoughts are not original. They also face the risk of being led by the blind, having wrong perception, and being too subjective. For the situation number 2, they can't be objective and they can't do logical thinking. Logical thinking is objective. When someone cannot do logical thinking, it simply means they cannot be objective. The point is, even logical thinking, the challenge is to what degree. Logical thinking is a process of self-challenge until the full logic is formed. How profound and how deep you could challenge yourself. It will show in the outcomes. When you present your outcome and the results can still be challenged, or it does not make a complete sense, it means your logical thinking process is not done, especially if there are still a lot of questions or obscurities. The interesting part is, logically, all researchers are logical thinking, but they only apply their logical thinking at work, in their research work. They don't apply their logical thinking in their personal life or matters other than the work. They just use their logical thinking for work. Another common scenario is you could have a logical thinking mind, but your feelings are stronger. Your feelings override your logical thinking outcomes. In other words, you know what you should do as a result of logical thinking, but you are a feeling-driven person. Your feelings are much stronger than your thinking. Ultimately, it means you cannot be objective. A feeling-driven person is subjective because feeling is subjective, despite you may have logical thinking ability. For the situation number 3, they simply don't see the point because this is just the way they are. In this situation, it simply means that this group of people, they do not have logical thinking ability. What makes sense to them is simply the feelings. They strongly believe that they should just live for themselves. They should only care about their own happiness. Everything else is secondary. Therefore, if you talk logic with them, it is like dog and cat talk. The only basis to them is feeling. The downside of the feeling-driven person is it is hard to be reliable because it does not matter who you are. If they don't feel good, everything can turn over in a split second according to how they feel. And it could take a long time for them to get back if something happened to them, if they are in a negative mode, when they feel bad. Having said all this, my suggestion for action plan is muse on every point mentioned in this video. This is a heavy and tough topic. The meaning is more profound than you initially hear. Therefore, I suggest that you hear it again and again until you get it fully. Why is it important to know? Because your thinking will affect your thoughts. Your thoughts will affect your feelings, and your feelings will affect your behaviors. Do you see that? Which means who you are is what you think. Who you are is how you think. And what you think express in your behaviors. You are who you are in action, not in what you say. Therefore, it takes time to know a person, and I know you by your behaviors. In conclusion, logically, how we think is the way we think. It involves a thinking process, whereas what we think could be on the basis of what others say, not necessarily involving a thinking process. About how we think, I do agree with Alison Green from Boston Tutorial Services. The three thinking modes she mentioned: convergent thinking, divergent thinking, and lateral thinking. The outcomes of these three modes of thinking are our original thoughts. It's objective and logical, whereas about what we think, this is the thinking on the basis of someone else's thoughts. The biggest misunderstanding is most people think feelings come from the heart, and behaviors are the outcomes of the emotion driven by feelings. The truth is, it is your brain that controls your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors. Feelings are the channels of your emotions, not the other way around, because emotions are the hormonal chemicals in your brain, and one of the biggest triggers is our thoughts. And our thoughts are the outcome of our thinking. If you truly understand this logic, if you truly see the full picture, it will make perfect sense for you to turn to logical thinking. Because logical thinking is the way you think objectively and see clearly. When you are objective and when you see clearly, you will do things that make good sense. Ultimately, when you do things with good sense, the outcome will also make good sense. Why is it important to know? We are controlled by how we think and what we think. This is our lives. Our lives are being controlled by our brains because our brains control our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. This is the logic. Do you see that? I'm Alicia Tay, a certified professional coach and a HRTF certified trainer. Learn to do reflection process objectively by watching Reflection Time with Alicia Tay to gain clarity. Because wisdom comes from reflection. Logic is the beginning of wisdom. Clarity leads to wisdom. Ultimately, be a wise person. Do subscribe to my channel so that you will be notified whenever I upload a new video. Thank you. See you in my next video.